And welcome to a new Italian PNC video on the Terra Infinita map from Nos Confunden. This is the 4th episode of the series, and for those that do not know, this is the map of the universe, or at least the one made by Nos Confunden. This map of the universe is a map that shows the universe as a plane, basically, that is not divided by only space as a non-matter, but it is divided by many different things. So Earth itself is surrounded by many rings that divide it from the lands near it, so it is possible to go from the Earth itself to the lands outside of the ice walls, and then the lands outside of the mountain ring. So you can see here we have different lands, and we already discovered them in episode 1. Then we moved around the other planes of existence, such as the lands of Mars, the Anunnaki lands, the lands of Seth, the lands of the Custodians, Quaoar, lands of Tyr, where a lot of things were discovered throughout the videos. Recently we left off by discovering such as the lands of Venus and places like the lands of Uranus, and we explained how many of these lands are linked with the mythological beings that we thought were basically fantasy from the ancient people of Earth. And we discovered how the ancient gods and ancient divine beings have links to the actual celestial planes. So, this episode we're going to concentrate on the lands east of what we recently did. So we did the lands of Neptune, and today we will go east from here and arrive to the borders of the known universe, which is then limited by the unknown zone, which not even Nos Confunden himself knows how to explain. Once again, I recommend to watch the videos before this one to get the full picture of what we are talking about, and I also recommend to check Nos Confunden's channel, the actual one. Well, with that done, let's get right into it. First of all, we have one of the most interesting parts of this map. As you can see, we have the lands of Eris. You can see here that it is divided from the lands of Neptune by a different type of matter than it is divided from the rest. Here we have oceans of helium in the lands of Neptune's terrain. And these oceans of helium actually go into, through this gate, the rest of the universe and arrive all the way up to the lands of Eris. So Eris is not traversable by boat or by ship or by any other way that includes water. The only parts of Eris which have water are the ones inside its 3rd ring. The ones inside the 4th ring are not traversable by boat. You will have to have some kind of wormhole or some kind of interstellar travel device to actually reach them. But let's get what the actual lands of Eris are. So once again we find ourselves face to face to one of the places that has most connections to ancient Greek mythology. We saw a lot of this in episode 1 when we were looking about the lands of Mars, where we saw that Mars is home to the Elysium, the ancient Greek afterlife, and the Eridania lands. When we saw how the Titans and the ancient primordial beings of ancient Greek mythology existed in the lands of Uranus, Titania, and the lands of Kronos and Pan. And now we find the lands of Eris, just to the right of the lands of Neptune, which by the way were once again linked to ancient Greek mythology, since Neptune is Poseidon, which was the god of the sea. The lands of Eris are probably one of the most interesting parts of this map, because Eris was the goddess of discord and conflict in ancient Greece. In fact, she was a very important figure in ancient Greek mythology, because she started one of the most well-known wars in all of ancient Greek mythology and history, the Trojan War. You probably can ask, why and how could a goddess of discord create enough conflict and tension to actually start one of the most well-known wars in the entirety of ancient history? Well, it all started when Eris, that wanted to bring the gods down, created an apple called the Apple of Discord, a golden apple that would be given to the Garden of the Hesperides. The Garden of the Hesperides was this place where many of the nymphs that were the daughters of Atlas, one of the titans we talked about in the latest video. Well, the lands of Eris are linked to this because the Garden of the Hesperides was the place where these nymphs would actually oversee the golden apples. And these golden apples were different from the one that Eris gave to the nymphs. In fact, that golden apple was created by Eris, and it was a force of malice. So what happened was that three goddesses, some of the most important goddesses of ancient Greece, these being Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, were all together and doing a beauty contest. So Eris created this golden apple to give as a prize to the most beautiful of these goddesses. You have to remind that Hera was the goddess basically of being a mother, the goddess of family, the mother queen goddess of the gods, while Athena was the goddess of intelligence, cunning, as well as the goddess of war planning. Finally, Aphrodite was the goddess of actual, attraction, sexual attraction, and the goddess of beauty. So Eris, after leaving this apple in the Garden of the Hesperides, got a person, a human, to come in the Garden of the Hesperides. This human was Paris. Paris was the son, Priamus and Hecuba, the king and queen of Troy. Paris went to the Garden of the Hesperides just doing whatever he wanted. He didn't even want to encounter the gods and the goddesses. But eventually, this human, which was apparently pretty well spoken and pretty good looking, was approached by the three goddesses. Each goddess asked Paris which of them was the most pretty and the one deserved the golden apple, which was actually the apple of discord created by Eris. Eventually, all the goddesses promised something to Paris, son of Priamus, and therefore the heir to the throne of Troy. Hera, the goddess of matriarchy and the queen goddess of the Greek pantheon, promised Paris richness and immense power, to the point where whatever he would say or do, Paris could command entire nations. Then Athena promised Paris that she would make him sapient, more intelligent than every other human, and even indestructible in war. But finally, Aphrodite promised him something that he actually desired: the love of the most beautiful woman alive. And this, of course, what was Paris chose. Eventually, he would meet this woman, her being Helen, the wife of Menelao, which was the king of Sparta. This would be the start of the reasons for the Trojan conflict, according to the Iliad. Therefore, Eris is directly a cause to the Trojan War and the thousands of dead that it procured, and the complete catastrophe that occurred after it. Now, let's actually talk about the lands of Eris. As you can see from the map, the lands of Eris are divided by 4 rings, but only 3 of them are actually relevant to the story, because the last one, the 4th ring, is actually easily traversable, thanks to this passage in the north. By going right here, you can enter the lands of Eris. Of course, once again, not through boat, as this is in the Ocean of Eolo. After it, you might be dumbfounded, because there is actually no access to the lands inside of this ring. In fact, you must go underneath the Ocean of Helium and traverse the land underneath the ice walls. Only then you will arrive to an ocean, an actual water ocean, that encounters the first continents in the lands of Eris. The lands of Eris are populated by those that died during the Trojan conflict. In fact, the souls that died in this conflict were not sent to Elysium or Eridania, as we saw with the lands of Mars, but are instead given this specific realm for them to get energy and prosper. Why would these people need to prosper and get energy? Well, Eris, the goddess Eris, is the goddess of conflict. She inhabits the most important of these rings. Under the one sun that exists inside of the most important of these rings, she lives on the eastern continent, right under her sun. Why would she need these old warriors, old dead souls of warriors in the Trojan War, to live in her own plane of existence? Well, there's a simple explanation, and it's right next to the lands of Eris. It is the lands of Hydra. The lands of Hydra are known as the International Gladiator Plane of Existence. The lands of Hydra feature multiple continents, all to be used as battlefields for an eternal struggle and battle that the souls that died during the Trojan War must use to fight one another. When the victor is chosen for one of these wars, he can return safely to the lands of Eris and live nearby to the goddess of Eris in the western continent. Notice how it's actually smaller than the continent that Eris lives on. So what happens is, these souls that were not brought to Elysium or Eridania and that were directly brought to the lands of Eris need to gain strength and reinvigorate themselves in the lands of Eris, outside of the second and third ring, and then they're transported when ready to the lands of Hydra. The lands of Hydra have multiple continents, as you can see from the map. There's some that are more lush and green, such as these ones, but there are some that are nearby ice, and that are very cold, like these ones. Then there's completely nothing for 2 whole rings. And finally, there is the main stage of these wars that are fought for Eris' pleasure. These 4 continents inside of its main ring are the places and the battlefields most used by these eternal gladiators that live in the lands of Eris. In numbers of thousands, even tens of thousands, they are brought to each of these continents, and like some kind of game, the other gods, as well as Eris, observe as they kill each other again and again, for Eris' pleasure. One victor only can be chosen, and when he is chosen, he gets to live nearby Eris, as one of the ones that can enjoy eternal peace. But of course, since these are already dead people, they don't just go nowhere after they're killed in battle. They just return to the lands of Eris, the ones beyond the main ring, and therefore continues the eternal cycle of war, death, rebirth, and war again that Eris subjects the people that she brought to their deaths through the lands of Hydra. Well, that was pretty depressing. Once again, this is not something you can go to, as it is only a continent for the dead. Although there is one gate that you could use through these ice sheets that are in its north, but we're not gonna mention it today. As for the lands of Eris, it is in fact traversable through this one passage. So, if you start from the Tierras de la Desilusión, you might be able to traverse the Ocean of Ilium through some way and eventually get into the lands of Eris. But how you can get from the parts outside of the last ring to those inside is another question, one you must discover yourselves. Next, we go to Mizar and Alcor. These are identified with some of the main stars that exist in the universe. Alcor's and Mizar's stars are some of the brightest stars that exist there. Yet, the continents they shine upon are not really used for much. Neither of them are inhabited by sentient life. The only life that exists on them is green flora, so trees, vegetation, bushes, and then some small kinds of fauna, which we do not have many informations on, although it's speculated that it includes small animals, such as some kind of herbivores that use the lands as their replenishment, and some kind of bugs or some other insects that can live in this climate. You can notice from the shape of the land that these once again do not have oceans on them, apart from the thin layer that envelops all these lands, while the part outside of it is constructed through helium. there is only a small ocean that can support marine life, while inside there's plants and flora, and what we already mentioned. Same thing for Alcor. The main difference that differentiates Mizar from Alcor is that Mizar only has one small continent, while Alcor has two. Once again, these are not traversable in any way. There is no way to get from outside these continents to inside of them. The only possible way would be to go on top of the ice walls that envelop the lands of Hydra and somehow traverse them all the way to Alcor and Mizar, once again making it extremely difficult for voyagers to attempt. Then we have the lands of the Eternal Fire. This is also one of the most important places in the known universe. The Eternal Fire was believed to be not only a thing, so the actual fire burning, but also a place. Since the Eternal Fire of the ancient Greeks was the fire that was burning in Olympia, the city of ancient Greece where the Olympics were held every 4 years, such is the case for the Eternal Fire. So what is the actual Eternal Fire? If it is not a fire, but if it is a landmass, what is it? Well, you can easily notice that this landmass has no discernible seas, so there is no ocean in here, only helium, and a void that envelops them, apart from the surrounding ice walls. Once again, no more than one ice wall surrounds this Eternal Fireland. What is on their continents? Why are there two? What is on these landmasses that is so important? One could argue that the Eternal Fire is what keeps the entire universe alive. The energy that is created through the burning of its star, and the reflection that it causes on the ocean of helium that is not contaminated by any other matter, such as water, ice, or anything else, creates a cycle of repetitive energy that gets used and used once more. This energy escapes this plane of existence even if it's surrounded from all sides by the ice walls. In fact, it creates the same energy that is used for the lands just down of it, which is the lands of the storms. Both the lands of the storms and the Eternal Firelands have something in common. They both create and use energy. The Eternal Fire creates most of this energy. Through the process I described before, it creates some sort of radiant energy that manages to make the universe continue. It does not host any living life forms or any living beings. On the other hand, the lands of the storms are literally what creates something called as plasma storms. These plasma storms go all the way from the original point of the lands of the storms, and they go all the way up to any part of the galaxy or the universe. These plasma storms, powered through the energy created in the Eternal Fire, are what cause spatial distortions. For those that do not know, one of the most important parts of traveling the map of Nos Confunden is spatial distortion. You cannot get to all places through conventional means. Many times, as we have explained before, you'll need wormholes to create them. These wormholes can be created through spatial distortions, and these spatial distortions are only possible through the plasma storms that are created through the Eternal Fire and lands of the storms. So realistically, one of the only ways you can traverse the universe is in fact being enabled by the lands of the storms and the Eternal Fire. And that's what it is. And this is why the Eternal Fire and the lands of the storms are so important for the rest of the universe. As if no life form could exist and thrive without them, or at least not if it wants to explore anything. We know that the lands of the custodians use these a lot to conquer and imperialize other lands, as we saw with the lands of Orion and the lands of Draco, as well as the lands of Venus. But there are other civilizations that have used these in the past, both the Etaminas of the lands of Draco, then the people of the Pleiades, when we know that the lands of Uranus also use these because these divine beings could have not gotten there without some plasma storms. Of course, these divine beings that live on these planes of existence, just as we saw with Eris, have been able to corrupt and use to their own favor the plasma storms and subsequent spatial distortions that are charged up by the infernal fire and lands of the storms. Yet, without them, they simply couldn't exist. Then we go to Bol. Bol is one of the least interesting and least relevant planes of existence in the universe. It is literally one ice wall that surrounds an ocean of helium that surrounds two literal balls of ice. I'm not sure if this is supposed to have any deeper meaning from Nos Confunden, or if it's literally two ice balls in a bowl. Probably both. I don't really know. And we find the Alkaid. The Alkaid is recognized as one of the passing stars. This means that this is not a firm one, but instead one that moves around. You can see by the simple light that this star shines that it is way stronger than those we saw earlier. It even produces more energy than those seen in the lands of Hydra or lands of Eris. Alkaid is a well thought out plane of existence. Although it is mostly made of helium, it does in fact contain oceans. Small oceans that only surround the continents that exist on Alkaid. These continents are in fact inhabited by some that we could call extraterrestrials. These are basically aliens. They don't look too similar to humans, but they do share some common characteristics. The people from the Alkaids do know how to create language. They do share emotions and feelings with the humans, but they do not have sense of property. Property is one of the most ancient senses and things and concepts humans thought of. The concept of someone having something and it being his. It's pretty easy for us humans to understand. But the people of Alkaid, which live in a way more restricted and less lush and less fertile environment, have been basically brought up their whole lives and their real existence by simple reliance upon others. To exist in an ocean of helium where one land cannot reach the other, because someone that could go from the ocean to the next could simply fall into the ocean of helium and never come back. Therefore, each of these continents hosts different types of life forms. Although they are all called arcadians, as is the name for the plane of existence, they are very different one from the other. In the old times, all these continents were one, but as they divided, all these creatures developed separately. Here, we do not know any of the names used for these continents, but simple directions are easy to tell. We have a southern continent here, which is the biggest landmass and hosts the most amount of Alkaidians. The Alkaidians in the southern continent, as far as I'm aware, are the ones that have life the easiest. They can fish in their relatively vast oceans, as well as live from the seeds of the land. On the other hand, the people in the western and eastern continents of the Midland are way worse well off. These people, or Alkaidians, cannot survive for long, have short lifespans that are just half of what usual humans have. They have less resources and less means of communication. One of the good things is that the star, the Alkaid star, that shines upon them is closer to them, which means that cold is never a problem in these middle lands, differently from what it is in the southern continent. Finally, we have one northern continent, which is relevant, and one smaller one. The smaller one in the north is one of the only places that is not inhabited by the Alkaidians, and it is instead inhabited simply by the fauna and flora of the continent. While this northern continent, this big one, is inhabited by a type of Alkaidians that consider themselves the best result of the Alkaidian experiments. In other words, these Alkaidians have managed to create different societies, different states, different borders, without ever waging war upon each other. These states have managed to rely upon each other and their people have never been in conflict with each other thanks to one simple thing. Basically, unlimited resources. In fact, under the continent that we can see on this map, there's an almost infinite amount of uranium and other materials for nuclear power. So, in this northern land, nuclear power is used to create all the energy, and the rest that the people need are of course just the fruits of the land, which thanks to its vast oceans, as well as the many fauna and flora found on the land, are easily accessible. For a scale, we can see Alkaid compared to Earth. Let me just get this clear. If you thought these oceans, or land masses, were small, well, you'll probably be pretty surprised by how actually big they are. We can use this made-up circle to compare it to the Alkaid plane of existence. Here we go. Just take this and bring it to Earth. As you can see, it is not only larger than the entirety of the lands inside of the ice walls, but is actually larger than the ice walls themselves, and even larger than half of, or at least 1/3 of the second ring. Therefore, the continents they have on the Alkaid are more than enough to sustain their life. Now, let's get to Nucleus 284. Nucleus 284 is another energy-creating planet. It is once again not inhabited and does not have any oceans. It only relies itself as one of the energy creators of Alkaid. Remember what we said about the almost infinite uranium deposits and our nuclear power deposits that exist on the Alkaid continent of the north, the bigger one? Well, their origin is what accommodates Nucleus 284 to Alkaid. In the past, Alkaid and Nucleus 284 used to be the same plane of existence. Eventually, through a spatial distortion of almost huge proportions created by the very nearby lands of the storms and infernal fire, they were cut off. Nucleus 284 was sent eastwards, while Alkaid was sent westwards. This created continents that shared and did not share resources. If the Alkadians ever managed to travel outside of their own ice world and into Nucleus 284, they could access an even wealthier and more important amount of resources. But the problem is this: if one of the Alkadian states or continents managed to travel outside of the ice walls, they could actually travel between them. They could actually travel also between the continents. If one of these continents see that the others are doing well, better than them, they could start to create wars and appropriations of land, and the concept of property could exist in Alkaid too. So the risk is, if Alkadians ever reach Nucleus 284 and gain their resources, they could become the greatest power in all of Alkaid, then creating a human-like society, maybe even an imperialist society that emulates the one of Earth. At that point, nobody would be there to stop the Alkadians from starting to take over the lands near them, like the lands of Leonis, which I'm not really sure about, so we'll have to do them in the next episode, or some other lands. If you know, thanks to the spatial distortions that are so easily found in this part of the universe, they could actually gain a foothold on lands far west of them, such as the Anunnaki lands, or, even worse, the lands of Earth. We do not have any historical records of the Alkadians actually ever coming to Earth, so that is why we don't think the Alkadians ever managed to get the resources or the technology to ever reach Nucleus 284. Here, in the east of Nucleus 284, we have the plane of existence of Eolo. Eolo, with its own small firmament, is one of the more interesting generator powers. Eolo stands for the god Aeolus in ancient Greece. Eolo, or Eolo, was the god of wind. Well, at least one of the winds. What this energy-creating plane of existence is the creator of winds that eventually come to the lands of storms. As you can see by the shape of its ice wall was actually molded and shaped through the actual winds that come outside of Eolo and go westwards, eventually touching the lands of Storm and the Alkaids. And Alkaid. And Alkaid. Thankfully for Alkaid, there's a bigger and more resilient barrier of the ice walls doesn't let the winds of Eolo ruin the planet, ruin the lands of Alkaid. On the other hand, the power and energy generated by the winds of Eolo will reaches the smaller ring of the lands of the storms and creates another reason for the spatial distortions that are created by the union of these two. Eolo itself is not known much about. We do know that there is some sort of flora, so plants, on its surface, but there is no recorded existence of beings, or at least sentient ones. Finally, we have Tanya Australis. Then we have Tanya Australis. Tanya Australis is the southernmost land of this entire state, of this entire constellation. Tanya Australis is a barren land where nothing can exist. It has many different equators, and the sun of the Tanya Australis and the sun of this plane of existence is not firm. In fact, it moves depending on the part of the continent, depending on the part of the millennia, throughout its many equators. Their two continents, outside of the main ring, are completely barren and covered with ice, as this sun is not really strong. Inside of it, we find something more different. The sun reaches high levels of temperature and critical amounts of energy when it reaches the inner part of the equator in the second half of the millennia that the cycle of Tanya Australis is going through. When the sun reaches this type of circle, it becomes extremely warm and heated. This causes the sun to react with the land inside of the ice walls. Not only the ice walls have been mostly melted, as you can see by this map, but the continent that was once existing in this part is even more irradiated with sun energy and heat. Eventually, in the last third of the millennia, the sun actually goes to this third equator that exists in the lands of Tanya. Once this happens, this continent becomes completely burned up, becoming some kind of huge volcano the size of an entire country on Earth. This is why there is nothing living in Tanya Australis, and it is a barren planet differently from Nucleus, Alkaid and Eolo. Finally, we have the lands of Kurha. The lands of Kurha are one of the links between the constellation of Hydra and the constellation of the Far East. Much like what we saw with Tanya Australis, the continents of Kurha are not really livable. They are in fact barren wastelands. But interestingly enough, the water that surrounds them is actually livable, and it is speculated that inside it there lived many different species of both underwater and above water creatures, with some speculating that the creatures that live on Kurha may even achieve sentience of some kind. Despite this, there is no easy way to reach Kurha outside of its small passage beneath the actual plane of existence we can see here. But nobody has actually sent an expedition or received any knowledge of it. Therefore, we can't either include or exclude the fact that it has sentient life. Well, that covers With that, we finished covering the constellation of Hydra, with its many and different lands, from the lands of Eris and the lands of Hydra, the major ones that are linked with ancient Greek mythology, to the more extraterrestrial and unknown lands in the Far East. Remember, the reason we have so little information about these eastern planets we covered is because they are, in fact, along the border of the unknown zone. So the easternmost we go, the less the informations are. Therefore, the reason we don't know places like Eolos, if there are any creatures on it, or if there's living beings that achieve sentience on Kurha in their oceans. With that, it's time to trace once again. The red border that divides what we covered and what we didn't cover. Starting from what we did today, we have the entirety of the constellation of Hydra. We covered a lot of lands today compared to other episodes, and a small and a big part, percentually, of the entire universe. In the last episode we covered the lands of Uranus, as well as the lands of Kronos. That puts the map like this. In our episodes we covered all these lands, even the Resurrection Islands, or lands, I don't remember which one is this. It's a Resurrection lands. We covered in the second episode the lands of Jupiter, we covered lands of Angels, Aldebaran, we covered the lands of Draco, the lands of Venus, and even the Tierras de la Desilusión here. That puts the amount we actually discovered in the universe roughly like this. As you can see, we're going and expanding our knowledge very fastly. We're now almost at 2/3 of the entire map. If you want to know more and explore more of this map, just continue supporting the series by putting a comment on the description of this video and let me know which one of the lands in this map we should cover next. Once again, thank you for the support, thank you for liking this video and subscribing, and we can see each other next time. Goodbye.